Hi everyone, it's Booney. I'm here with a colleague, Dr. Mike, and he's graced us with his time and expertise to share a little bit about ADHD and his work. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thanks, Booney. Thanks for having me here to talk a little bit about psychiatry and specifically ADHD and how we can help our clients out there.
So I'm just going to start off with the interview. So can you share a little bit about you as a person and your work?
Yeah, so my name's Dr. Mike Feldmeier. I'm a child and adolescent psychiatrist. So that means that I went through the training to become a general psychiatrist for adults, and then also did additional training for children. Right now, I'm the founder of Level Up Mental Health, which is my private practice. And along with that is levelupmentalhealth.com, which is my blog that's about, that has the goal to improve mental health and relationships around modern day technology use. So I think it's a worthwhile endeavor to go into. A little bit about my training. I'm a SoCal native, but for medical school, I moved out to Chicago when I attended Rush Medical College. After that, I got into a residency in California. I'm a graduate and former chief resident at the UCLA Olive View General Psychiatry Residency, as well as a graduate and former chief fellow of the West LA VA Child and Adolescent Psychiatry Fellowship. So, mouthful.
That's really cool.
But more about me personally, I'm an avid video gamer. I like to watch anime. I like to travel to, mostly I travel to most of the Asian countries. I've been to Korea, Taiwan, Japan. Also went to, Indonesia. So I'm also half Indonesian. So that's why that was important.
Right on. Yes. When you said chief resident, I thought of Grey's Anatomy. Like, that's so cool.
Yeah.
Is it like that?
You know, actually, where we used to do our outpatient clinic was where they filmed Grey's Anatomy.
That is even extra cool, you guys. It's so cool. Extra cool points right there.
I might have a photo of that bridge that they
really.
It's not in Seattle. It's in California.
That bridge is so important. Yeah. Awesome. You have such a cool experience. And I do think it's important to share your heritage. I think a lot of people who are mixed heritage, mixed ethnicity, they're looking for people to understand, you know, the hybridity, the identity struggle and the journey. So thank you so much for sharing that part.
Yeah, of course.
So the first question that I'm curious about, because I've actually had to explain it to a couple people before, is what's the difference between a psychiatrist, psychologist, and a therapist?
Yeah, so there's a lot of overlap in the field of mental health as far as psychotherapy. So all three of us can do psychotherapy, and the type of psychotherapy that we practice is really dependent on our training program. So for me, I went to a psychodynamic training program. We also did a lot of CBT. So those are kind of my two modalities that I use. And so I think you can get good training in all three levels. So when you say therapist, typically people are talking about a master's degree therapist. And when you talk about a psychologist, that's typically a doctoral level, someone with either a PhD or a PsyD. And so all three of us can get really good training in psychotherapy. The main delineation between a psychiatrist and the other types of therapists is the ability to prescribe medications. And in order to kind of gain mastery of that, one has to go through medical school and do all the steps to become any sort of a physician. So for me, I went to medical school in Chicago. So it's a very lengthy process. I think for me, it took 9 years to get from like post college to where I am now. 9 additional years of training. So it's long.
Oh my gosh, I didn't know it took that long. I actually thought it was only 6 years or 8 years. 9 years that's persistence.
So because I did a specialization in child psychiatry, what they do is they truncate the general practice to 3 years, and then we do 2 years in child. So yeah.
That's so neat. So I'm gonna kind of add an additional question to that. When people are looking for a therapist, sometimes they're so unsure or unfamiliar with what people offer. I've had someone ask me, can a marriage and family therapist work with trauma? You know, it's they're not sure what to look for when they're looking for someone with these labels. You know, it's do you have any additional insight or?
Yeah, definitely. So I think that at all three levels of types of therapists, you can find good quality in those different niches. So in trauma in particular, yeah, you can get good trauma-focused CBT. And I know EMDR is also pretty popular. We did trauma-focused CBT in my training program. And so, yeah, that's really dependent on whatever program they went to.
Thank you.
Everyone has their own specialties.
Yes, and that's important to look into. I like your range of focus where you went the psychodynamic route, but also CBT. It's like you knew kind of implicitly to go towards integrating the both sides of the brain, the
Yeah,
metaphorical
exactly.
and the logical rational. That's so cool.
Yeah. That wasn't my choice. That was part of the program, which I think, you know, it speaks to the program's quality. So
it does.
Very happy with that.
Very nice. What types of, let's see, I think you mentioned this, but we'll explore a little bit more. What type of practices and care does your practice offer?
Yeah, so you know, I offer treatments for mild up to severe psychopathologies. That can range from things like ADHD to depression, different anxiety disorders. I tend to specialize in things like OCD, generalized anxiety, and panic disorder.
Okay.
That can be also bipolar disorder, PTSD, and the range of psychotic disorders. And then there are, well, talking kind of about other psychiatrists, there are other specialties out there, such as sleep specialists and addiction specialists who kind of are more focused on those things.
And that's very beneficial for people to know, because maybe it wasn't even on their radar to look into something like sleep, because it's so important.
Very, very important.
And so it's awesome that your team can cover everything. It's wonderful.
Yeah.
So next question is, what are the criteria for an ADHD diagnosis, and does gender matter in identification?
Yeah, so I can kind of give a brief overview of kind of like the big topics of ADHD, and I can also talk about the actual diagnostic criteria, but kind of thinking at a sky level of things, there are sort of three different versions of ADHD that are common. And it'll be the inattentive version, the hyperactive version, and then what we call the combined type, which has kind of features of both and tends to be the more easy to recognize and more frequent version. And so they end up getting good treatment and good frequency of diagnosis. Also important to know about ADHD, it is a lifelong neurodevelopmental disorder. That's something that develops as your brain develops. It's not something you can catch or that you develop later in life. There's a question that arises, is there such a thing as adult ADHD? And, you know, adults, it can happen that an adult doesn't really have any dysfunction as a child. That doesn't mean that they didn't have it. It just wasn't recognized.
That's a very good point. And what do you think about the gender component?
Yeah, so this is a very interesting question. So one of the things that a lot of people kind of understand is that it seems like there's a lot more boys than girls with the disorder. However, that's sort of not that true. It's slightly true. There is a slightly higher prevalence of the disorder in boys versus girls, but it's not as strong as we would think. However, so as far as who presents in childhood, you're going to see about a 9-to-1 ratio of boys to girls.
Oh my God,
which
really?
is like pretty significant. However, what's actually out there by the time boys and girls are adults is more of a 3-to-2 ratio. So much closer of a gap. And what they think is that a lot more girls have the inattentive predominant style of ADHD, which doesn't get the attention that it necessarily needs. So often boys who are disruptive and making trouble in the classroom get identified, but girls who are kind of just having poor attention and kind of just sitting at their desk, they don't get recognized, which is unfortunate because they don't get treated.
How do you think that impacts women when they're older, you know?
Yeah, so I think it impacts them very, very poorly. I had one case where this little girl had very inattentive style ADHD, and also along with that a learning disability, strictly speaking, a verbal processing disorder. And her mom just thought she had bad hearing and thought that she just was choosing not to pay attention. And then we found out it was this combination. And I think like afterwards, her life got a lot better. But as an adult, yeah, if you're unable to attend and you never get the treatment and you're sort of told that, just deal with it, it's very hard to kind of, feel like you're worthwhile. So I think your self-worth can be damaged from that aspect.
It does take a while to kind of pick yourself back up too. But I think the diagnosis could be so empowering, relieving. Thank you.
Yeah, it's an answer, yeah.
It is. You can offer answers to people. Let's see. So how do those with ADHD experience the world differently than others? And how do you help treat someone with ADHD?
Yeah, so I want to kind of talk about this example that we actually use when we're describing anxiety disorders and how they developed in humans. So there's this example that we talk about, like primitive man, when they're in their hunter-gatherer stage. And so a person with ADHD in that time would actually have a distinct advantage over someone who didn't have ADHD, who was really just very focused. So if these two humans, one with ADHD, one with not, or what we call ADHD at least, if they go down a path and they're picking berries and they keep going down the same path, eventually that path is going to run out of berries. The person with ADHD will go off of the path and they will find berries. At the same time, they're going to be kind of focused on what's going on around them rather than just the berry bush. And they'll be able to identify predators, which increases their survivability. So kind of, having these different traits is part of what makes us as humans kind of an enriched species. And so given the situation, ADHD can be advantageous, but kind of the way that we do things in our modern day society, where we have to have kids sit in a desk or on Zoom now for 6 hours, 8 hours at a time, or working in a cubicle, that is a disadvantage to have ADHD, because you have to kind of sit and do one task and then do the next task. But with an ADHD brain, you kind of want to do everything all at once.
Yeah.
It's hard to determine what's the most important, what's the most salient thing.
Oh, okay, exactly. So with that though, I just want to add personal experience related to not knowing what to do next. I have at least 50 tabs open on my internet, all the time. I get excited about wanting to continue this, start this, research something different. And it is so difficult to really focus and hone in on, because the possibility is endless, right? We circle around and go back and forth. It's exhausting, really. How do you help people with just a different cognitive mindset or profile manage what to do? Like, what do we do with it?
Yeah, I mean, there's 100 different answers to that. It's really person dependent. So what I would say is like try different things and see what works for you. So personally, I do have a kind of mild moderate ADHD myself, which didn't become really dysfunctional or apparent until medical school. However, like if you look at my past when I was in elementary school, I definitely was hyperactive and I got in trouble a lot. And so, but as I got older, like a teenager, I didn't really have that much dysfunction. I was able to do what I needed to do in school with like the 30 minutes of focus that I did have during that time. But as I got older, like as demands of like society or your own microcosm get higher, you know, the inattentive side of things starts to become a lot more apparent, inattentive and executive dysfunction. So what I do for myself personally is I need to write things down. Like I know that digital calendars don't work as well for me as like physical ones. And really kind of making a hierarchy of what's important and making a list because I have that same tendency where I kind of start lots of projects and my completion rate is probably like 10%. So
Right
it is a true problem, but at the same time, like think of how many different like at-bats you're having so many more than everyone else. Like you have all these great ideas, which is a benefit, but it's just like sometimes you have to kind of put away some of the distractions, open up just the one tab and focus on that. There's a really good book called Deep Work. I forget who the author was. I don't know if you've read that.
No.
But basically the premise of that is, you know, humans are very capable of learning complex tasks and gaining mastery, but you have to just focus on the one task. The concept of multitasking is something that is not compatible with humans, ADHD or not. Like there's this like myth that you can focus on multiple things, but if you truly want to get the most out of something, you have to really focus in on one thing.
Right on.
The hardest thing to do for ADHD.
I really appreciate you sharing. And I think just you keep on sharing the strengths and the asset of having the ability to scan and do multiple things. It's so empowering to hear, you know, and your transparency with having it as well. I'm sure it will empower so many people to take ownership of what's going on, because a lot of us, we have to bypass or overcome the shame, the feeling like we're not good enough. It's such a personal experience. When you usually hear the term ADHD, I'm sure people just think, oh, they're just scatterbrained and kind of silly sometimes. Like they don't really know the depth of what's going on. You know, the mind and body, whatever is going on, is a lot of intense balancing that's difficult compared to someone who is neurotypical, right?
Absolutely.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
I really appreciate you sharing. I'm just going to go up through and see what other people have asked on my Facebook, and maybe you can cover some of them.
Okay.
Let me see. So one of them was ways to keep dopamine flowing.
Yeah, so dopamine is part of the dysfunction that occurs with ADHD. Let's see, I have a tab here. So typically when we're talking about inattentiveness, we're talking about the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex in your brain and sort of a relative lack of dopamine. So what we do with medications is we use stimulant medications, and that increases the relative amount of dopamine available for your brain, which allows for more sustained attention and focus. So what happens when a person doesn't have that going on? Well, what they're doing is they're going to look for ways to kind of stimulate that themselves. So in our modern day society, your cell phone is the most readily accessible thing for that. No matter what process or app you're looking at, you're getting some sort of instant gratification. So you know, you're getting likes on your posts, you're seeing new interesting news articles, you're seeing what your friends are doing, what they're drinking, what boba they got, and And it's that instant feedbacks that you're getting. So you're always getting a little bit of a kick of dopamine. Same thing with video games. That's why they're so, there's that kind of relative addictiveness of video games for people with ADHD, because they get that instant gratification, that instant dopamine kick. And then it becomes kind of difficult once you get used to that, once that reward center or reward pathways triggered over and over, you get used to that, and that becomes your new normal. So it becomes very difficult to kind of separate yourself from that. So, you know, I've been a fan of sort of like dopamine holidays or dopamine detoxes. And that's really hard to do in kind of the demands of modern day, especially if you're like you or I, who need to use computers for work. It's really hard.
So do you think that, you know, the holidays, does it have to be, would it be more effective to have it a whole day, or is it okay to even just like designate a couple hour chunk? Would that, is that
That's
okay?
a good question. That's a good question. So if we're talking about restoring, like if you're so dysfunctional that you have what we call internet gaming disorder, for example, you need a long period of time to restore normal levels of your dopamine receptors in your brain. So like, and that takes several weeks to months. But for the common person with ADHD who sort of just uses their cell phone too much, I think designating some of that time, you know, maybe it's an hour, maybe it's 2 hours away from devices, can be very beneficial. So yeah.
Okay, but for a gamer, it's just the treatment looks a little bit different.
Yeah, I would say that as a caveat that it has to be, when I'm talking about video game addiction. So the typical gamer isn't addicted to video games. It's not as common as people say. But yeah, people can still have problematic gaming and not be addicted.
I love that. Thank you for being an affirmative gamer. Let's see. It's in black on black. Why did I do that? I can't read black on black. Let's see. Okay. I know there's one here. Where is it? La 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 la. Oh, comorbidity.
Yeah. So comorbidity is a very interesting topic for me. So neurodevelopmental disorders are always kind of comorbid with other neurodevelopmental disorders. So someone with ADHD can have things like autism, specific learning disabilities. They can have things like Tourette's and OCD, along with the other kind of more common mental health issues, including like things like anxiety disorders and depression. So, and I think there is a portion of those comorbidities that are in response to sort of social interaction because of ADHD. So what I mean by that is I'll use the example of social anxiety. So if you're someone with ADHD and you say the wrong thing all the time and you think it's funny and your friends don't think it's funny, eventually they're not going to want to be your friend anymore. And then you start to get kind of sensitive to that. And then you start to think like, well, if I go to the party and I say the wrong thing, everyone's going to hate me or make fun of me. And sometimes that is true. But that develops into, you know, its own disorder. And we call that, you know, social anxiety.
I really appreciate that, because I think sometimes think that there's no control over what has become or the labels that they get, and they internalize it. But context and environment, social interaction shapes so much more than we sometimes believe it does. Very, very useful information. I think I have one more. Oh, one more I wanted to note on. So when I worked in elementary schools, I saw a lot of children who were being diagnosed as ODD or ADHD. But for me, through my personal lens, I thought it was trauma. Could you kind of explore that a little bit with me?
Yeah. So, you know, you can get a lot of acting out, you know, in situations where someone has experienced trauma, either through, you know, physical violence, sexual abuse, or even just witnessing domestic violence. And you know, I would also say that trauma can be comorbid with these things too. So it could be that both were true. You every individual is different, but I've definitely seen traumatic presentations that weren't true ADHD, but they had still sort of the same clinical features of ADHD. But once you go through CBT, some of that starts to resolve, and they're able to kind of focus. Because it's very difficult to focus when you're thinking that something is going to come through the door and hurt you. That's just, we're humans. We have vulnerabilities. So that's sort of a typical reaction to trauma.
Thank you so much. And I think that that's something a lot of people question. They're not really sure. So I think the term learning to embrace multiple things and happening at the same time, comorbidity, is a really important part of being a human being. But mental health is it's a confusing concept for so many of us, right?
Yeah.
So I really appreciate you sharing this with us. I think people are going to be learning so many truth bombs from you.
Yeah, thanks.
Do you have any additional things you want to share on ADHD?
Yeah. So ADHD is, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. But what I think makes it make a little bit more sense is if we change that D from deficit to something more like dysregulation, it starts to make a lot more sense for people. It's not truly a deficit, actually. It's more of a imbalance of how you're perceiving the world, like what is important. It's an issue with salience and volitionally accessing your attention. It's very hard to discern what's important when you're always constantly being distracted by every single stimuli and stimuli within your own mind, when you're just like very curious about things.
Yes.
Let's see. There's a few other things I'd like to mention about that.
Awesome.
Well, for people with ADHD, what I would say to them is, don't beat yourself up about, some of the mistakes that you've made. It is part the disorder, but at the same time, don't completely excuse yourself from your behavior when it's hurtful to other people. ADHD is sort of a series of traits, but it's not like a destiny. It can be something that enriches your life in certain ways, but also it can be sort of a very annoying thing. And it can be annoying not just for you, but for your loved ones. If you're an adult, your spouse, and if you're a child, your parents. But it's something that you guys can work on together.
Wonderful. And I just wanted to share a couple of the traits that a therapist commented on my post. She said that, like, don't forget to mention some of these things, Booney. So I'm going to just throw these out and maybe you can note some of them. One is time blindness. You already mentioned it affects relationships. It does for sure. Sleep, money management, executive functioning. We probably covered that a little bit. And then I don't know if you want to cover this. I don't know if this is a thing. Hypersexuality.
So that's part of impulse control. Hypersexuality in itself isn't typically what we think of with ADHD. When we're thinking of the broader symptom of impulse control, then hypersexuality is definitely one of them. Okay. So it doesn't have to be part of it, and I wouldn't say that it's necessarily like a majority of it, but we see things like that more in diagnoses like bipolar disorder.
Okay, great. Thank you for the differentiation. The one that really affects me is time blindness. When I try to explain to people that I really don't understand the concept of time, it's just like I'm floating between the past, present, and future. I'm sure people find that really hard to grasp, but that's just how it feels many times, How would you help someone who has a very difficult time with time blindness?
Yeah, so I think going back to more kind of simplified ways of time management. So using like blocking out times, to do certain tasks. And then once that time is up, you move on to the next task.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes that can include using an alarm. So like one kind of popular way that people do this is the Pomodoro method,
Mm-hmm.
where you kind of set 25 minutes and then take a 5-minute break and then move on to the next task. And that can be very helpful. Or when I was in elementary school, like I would always rush through my assignments, and then, but if I spent like the adequate amount of time on it, I'd probably have more success.
Yeah. I like that a lot. I've been introduced to the Pomodoro method so many times. People are just like, Booney, just do that method.
Yeah, you should get the tomato timer and just do it. So I think the tomato timer is essential for having success with that. Don't use the screen timers, because then you'll just get distracted.
I will. I just keep on staring at it. Oops. Okay, thank you. Let's see. I have a couple of questions left. So I know that you're a geek and a gamer. What are some impactful games or parts of geek culture that have shaped your life positively?
Yeah, so I think of one story. When I was about 10 years old, me and my sister used to play Super Nintendo a lot. She's about 7 years older than me, so it kind of became baked in my mind that I was always supposed to lose and she was always supposed to win, because she was like 17 at the time. So she'd always get further along in the levels when we used to play like Mario and stuff. But one day we were playing Mega Man X, which is one of my favorite games, and we just couldn't beat Storm Eagle. So eventually, we just kept going back and forth, kept losing for hours. And then at one point, I beat him. And this was like sort of this aha moment. Like, after trying and trying over and over, like I realized that, if we keep trying and fail and try again, eventually you can succeed at something. And at the same time, I shouldn't adhere to this preconceived notion that I'm worse than someone at something just because I'm supposed to be. So that was kind of mind-opening to me. And the concept of kind of trying, failing, and trying to get better and not worrying about perfectionism, I think is very valuable in someone who's either doing medicine or another helping field like in mental health.
That's so cool to have such a vivid, impactful story to share with others, because it really is like that. It'd be like that sometimes, right? It really is. Like, I know people say, life is not like a video game. Like, you know what? I think it really is. If you can view things in terms of positivity, growth, mindset, it totally can be where your story, you evolved as a hero, you leveled up, you can be that hero, and the game can really mirror your potential and what's already inside you. Amazing.
Absolutely, yeah. Some other things out of geek culture that I think are worthwhile. There's a lot of complex topics that are explored in different media considered to be geek culture or entertainment. So, things like the concept of the Jedi. It's a person that follows a code that's very similar to the Bushido code with a little bit of like Western Christianity mixed in, but kind of like the best aspects of both. And sort of interesting thing to look at. And then it introduces you to things like, if you look at Spock from Star Trek, he's like a very extreme example of like stoicism from Greek philosophy. And then I also like the example of the X-Men, which are like this fictionalized version showing kind of what injustice, inequality, and divisiveness look like. So there's a lot that you can kind of use to grow as a person by just like watching sci-fi. So
got a geek element. He's one of us. Yes. Oh my gosh, yes. I love weaving in. I think that was the whole point of sci-fi. The point was to externalize human themes. It's not just for pure entertainment. It's the human component of our resonance already. We just had to change up the story a little bit to make it look like alien in some way for us to really learn the lesson,
Yeah. That's exactly it.
Yeah. It's so cool that you like Jedi stuff.
Yeah. I got Baby Yoda here, so.
Baby Yoda. And do you use this in your work?
Yeah, I mean, I can't not. It just happens naturally. I don't even perceive it. I just do it. So it's been useful for me connecting with my patients and clients, and it's something I'm going to keep doing. So
Right on, right on. More power to you. May the force always be with you.
You as well.
Thank you. Let's see. Do you have a message you'd like to leave with those with ADHD and individuals and loved ones who are affected by ADHD?
Yeah, so I think I kind of mentioned, don't beat yourself up, but also don't not hold yourself accountable for when you are at fault. So just stay mindful of that. And yeah, having ADHD isn't an excuse that you can use, but it's something that helps you understand, why you've done things, and I think it's useful if you learn from those experiences. So maybe you'll have more experiences due to kind of this impulsivity. But at the same time, that's so much more life that you're living that can be valuable. One other thing I'd mention to people is, learn ways to enjoy life that aren't always through instant gratification. Like find something that's entertaining to you that's more of a delayed type of gratification. So, examples I like to use are things like martial arts, yoga, language learning, music, art, computer coding, even, as long as you're not getting distracted and going off somewhere else on your computer. But these things, if you stick to them and put in consistent time and effort, you'll really prove to yourself that, things over time are worthwhile, and kind of train your brain better for that instead of just expecting kind of the quick hit all the time.
I love the holistic picture that you have of having ADHD, because it's going to be a lifelong trait, a lifelong lens of the world and where we are dealing with stimulation, gratification, like you said. We can have all parts of that spectrum of instant, but also prolonged. I think that's where you're leveling up yourself as a person with ADHD. You can prove to yourself that you can play the long game. It is such a powerful feeling to know that you've mastered that part of your brain and your body. And I encourage people to do that as well. As like people who watch my stuff, I'm chill. I'm chill as AF, but like I have impulsive moments as well, of course. And yet, it is your own hero's journey to figure out how you're going to do it. But I love that you mentioned like the physical parts. You mentioned martial arts, but also cerebral concepts as well, because a lot of us are diving into knowledge all the time, want to learn. We're fascinated with knowledge, but being present with our body is super important as well. I'm going to actually give that a try this year. So
okay,
see how it goes.
Sounds good.
Yeah. And one last thing is, how can people find and contact you?
Yeah, so I can be found most easy through my website, levelupmentalhealth.com, as well as on Instagram at levelupmentalhealth. I also have a YouTube channel under the name of Level Up Mental Health. I will probably be changing the name just because when you search my my channel name, it gets buried by someone else with Level Up in their name. So I'll probably end up changing it to just my name. And so but I can't do that until after I hit 100 subscribers. So if you guys can subscribe.
Yeah, just follow his channel, give him a sub.
I will comment on this video, and you guys can click on it that way. That's probably the easiest way, because I get buried, like I said. But yeah, those are the ways to find me.
Awesome. And I'll also link all his social media content and website in the video description. Please, please, please give him a follow, support his stuff. I think we need more representation. We need more encouragement, and just people who actually experience these states of being to support and empower their own people and community. That's the part that I think is the most important. Thank you so much for having, I'm not interviewing.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks so much for being with me. I appreciate it.
No, thank you. Thank you so much for having me here to tell people a little bit about psychiatry. I know it can be confusing, and typically people don't see psychiatrists until something has gone wrong. But we're a resource that's out here in the medical community, medical and mental health community. So it was nice to have a chance to kind of talk about what we do in hopefully a non-confusing way. And it was also nice to kind of have a chance to talk a little bit about ADHD, because I think it's a great disorder because it's very treatable, and it's but at the same time it makes you who you are. Giving people a chance to kind of not stand in the way of themselves is a very enriching, rewarding thing that I get to accomplish in my job. So
wonderful. And again, you can find his information in the video description. Please give him some support, and I know he'll be empowering the community for many, many years to come. And I look forward to seeing you level up as well. Take care, everybody. Thank you.